AAA gaming studios have had a rough go of it recently. In particular, the RPG genre has been suffering. The best games have not come from the big developers, and a lot of people are taking swings at why that might be. That's sort of what this video is about, but more broadly speaking, it's about writing in games in general, and why I think that the real problem with the RPGs that have come out recently has not actually been a lack of innovation. Because in my opinion, games like Kingdom Come Deliverance, Expedition 33, and Baldur's Gate, which have all done really well and come from slightly smaller studios, all of them were not that innovative in terms of technology or anything like that. Yeah, they had a lot of scope, but I think what they really did well is they had passion, they had focus, and they had really good dialogue. And funny enough, the real thing I'm going to highlight in this video is the fact that major games from bigger studios also have that potential hidden inside of them. I'm going to start this video by talking about Outer Worlds 2, which I know is like a medium big game, not really AAA, but it's a fascinating one to me because I think it's the most average game I've played in a long time, but I loved the combat. And I actually do think that a lot of the RPG going on in here, like the character creation and some of the perk systems, was super fun and really innovative. I had a great time with it. And it did have some good writing, just buried in between mountains of mediocrity. And so I want to highlight the small places it came up short, because I think this game was frustratingly close to actually being kind of incredible. So let's dive into it and talk about why the only innovation that games need right now is good writing.
That's right. On factory floors.
Have you ever noticed how good the ambient dialogue is in video games? Like when you're just walking around and you're listening to random NPCs talking. That's oftentimes some of my favorite tidbits that I hear in a video game, and it's some of the most engaging stuff. Sometimes I'll just stroll through a town and listen to the random conversations. And then, when I suddenly get locked into a cutscene, suddenly it's a lot less entertaining. I think this shows that the people writing these games actually do know what good dialogue sounds like and are totally capable. The problem is that the main dialogue you have to engage with is ridiculously expository. The way that most NPCs in Outer Worlds 2 monologue at you is ridiculous. They talk in these full paragraphs that are, to me, unrealistic. I think people usually go back and forth saying half sentences. And everything they say is so blatantly designed around just telling you where you should go next. And I know to some degree that's necessary. You need to have information about what your next quest is. But I would argue that you could pull back on it quite a lot and still give the player enough information. I think it would make a big difference if you literally just weren't locked in place while NPCs were talking. Those same dialogue choices were just at the bottom of my screen, and I could still walk around and be in the game world. That would feel a lot more immersive to me. And I also think that the core of good game design is player freedom. People should be allowed to just randomly walk away and miss important dialogue if they want to. Games punish you for making mistakes. That's kind of what makes them fun. If you die in combat, you start over. Hypothetically, if you miss important dialogue and you don't know all the information about where you should be going next, that's a form of entertaining punishment where you have to figure it out for yourself. It would make listening to quest givers actually an engaging experience because your success in understanding what they meant would not be guaranteed. I want everything in a game to feel like success is not a given. And in a lot of RPGs nowadays, it feels like the gameplay has that element, but the story is so safely cushioned because they want to make sure that you get to every single piece of content. And that's what will relate us over to the concept of scope, which is not just scope in terms of the size of the game. I mean scope in terms of the narrative structure. One weird little thing that bothered me a lot in Outer Worlds 2 is that most planets, and especially cities, didn't feel very lived in. The game would tell me I was headed towards a major hub city, and then it would be 12 shops and 3 other random NPCs. I don't understand why you needed to label that a hub city if the only thing you had time to develop was a small town. Just call it a town. Outer Worlds 2 is a Western in terms of its genre vibe. And if I was just going from small town to small town and you just told me that, I'd be totally down for it. You don't need to pretend that things are major cities. Baldur's Gate 3 was a game that had a true major city in it. But that major city was literally 1/3 of the entire game. They understood that if you want to tell players they're headed towards the biggest city in the realm, you better spend a significant portion of the game there. I know it sounds small, but I think that the way you label things in games sets players' expectations for what they're about to interact with and affects how satisfying that experience is. And I wish studios were more bold in their willingness to throw away content, to have massive sections of the game be totally skippable. I actually felt the most rewarded in Baldur's Gate 3 when I realized I had missed a significant portion of the game, because it made me realize how important my decisions were. In Outer Worlds 2, it feels like every time I get to a problem, like a door I need to hack through, I can quickly find out that there are like 4 other ways to get into that room, and that basically no matter what, I am going to end up in that room. Speaking of rooms, I actually think the funniest and most noticeable visual metaphor for the problems with this game's writing is the amount of villains you encounter who are trapped in rooms. It's so funny. There is such a theme of guys behind glass who are doing something evil and telling you about it. And obviously the reason for that is because they want you to be able to talk to the villain without directly interacting with them yet. But this feels like such a lazy way of achieving that. I do think that this style of villain is actually the perfect one in most video games. I think if you think of some of the greatest gaming villains of all time, I throw up there the Lich King, Handsome Jack, Strahd, if you want to go all the way back to D&D. These are all villains who loom in the distance, sending threats at you while you can't really interact with them. I would say the major difference is, though, that these villains, it makes sense why you can't interact with them yet. The Lich King is too powerful. Handsome Jack is literally on the moon. In the Outer Worlds 2, the main villain is essentially the Rifts, which you find out right at the beginning of the game, and then they immediately tell you, yeah, but we're not going to deal with these rifts yet. And it's not really clear why that is. It feels like everything that happens in the Outer Worlds 2 is pushing you away from what your main goal is. And they're borrowing the structure of this massive looming villain thing, but they're just using it as a hook without truly understanding why that structure works so well. The exact same mechanic is frustrating versus rewarding depending on how you label it. And that's the point I want to return to finally. I've seen a lot of talk recently about lack of innovation in the gaming industry. And maybe that's happening a bit, but a lot of the most popular games recently were all AA studios that I wouldn't say truly fundamentally changed anything about the mechanics or structure of the genre. I think they were just more focused, more passionate. And I also think that games are not going to keep evolving at the rate they were for a while. The evolution of gaming from 2D pixels to fully simulated 3D worlds was massive, and a lot of stuff changed and a lot of innovations happened. AI has some potential to do similar things in the future, but I don't think that's what we need in order to make games better. I'm a big fan of passionate artists with singular vision and original ideas. I think we've been stuck in sequel hell in the video games industry for a long time. Even games like Outer Worlds were a soft sequel to Fallout New Vegas. Gamers oftentimes, I think, can fall for nostalgia bait quite a lot. But as gamers, when we experience a game we love, I don't know that we should be demanding more of that same game. I don't know that we should be asking for Baldur's Gate 4. I'm actually really happy Larian is moving on to a totally different project next, because it means they won't be tied down by expectations related to the characters who existed in Baldur's Gate 3. They will have the opportunity to go in very different directions. When people ask for innovation, what they really want is something new, something that surprises them. And for a while, that was innovation in terms of mechanics, but there could also be innovation in terms of narrative. And that's what I would really like to ask for. Whatever Obsidian makes next, instead of playing off of nostalgia and trying to give gamers what they've been asking for, I would love to see them completely ignore all of us and just make something they're excited about. But we need to support game developers in that endeavor. So next time you play a game you really enjoy, instead of going and looking for when there's going to be more of it, a sequel, DLC, whatever, maybe just take a moment and reflect on how wonderful that single, isolated experience was, just as like a mental practice of appreciating things that don't last forever. Don't know if that's going to change the entire industry, but maybe it's a start. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you in the next one. Have a wonderful day.